she is an online community architect, a decade into her expertise, and a PhD student studying the measurement of online community toxicity at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Speaking of which, don't ask her what time it is in Melbourne, Australia right now, because like she's maybe a little tired. I don't know. Today we're talking community moderation metrics. These metrics have always been important, but these metrics are now essential with the rise of AI generated content. Smaller platforms face big challenges, and in this session, you're going to create a custom moderation metrics tool by reverse engineering solutions used by larger players. So please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Venia Logan. Yay! Woo!
Hello, hello. We can hear me okay? Everything is good? All
Look
right,
and sound
wonderful.
great.
Wonderful. Sound off in the chat. I'm so excited about this. The specific topic that we're talking about today, it's been around for like how many years now? Like half a decade now, which is just like, how do we build metrics for like very snowflake kind of communities? They're all different. They're all kind of the same, you know? So like one of the big things that I want to do as we go into this, we have a lot of ground to cover, but I promise it's super simple because I wanted to specifically take the challenge of actually helping you build the metrics just like us experts do. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring up this presentation, and I hope that we are all ready to get started and have a larger discussion about the way that we build those metrics in addition to the actual development of moderation as a whole. So we should be able to see my slides perfectly fine. For some reason that's not, oh, I clicked the wrong button. We're fine. Okay, so slideshow. Okay, we're gonna just deal with the browser. That's what's gonna happen. Hope that's okay for y'all. So I'm not gonna spend too much time about me because honestly, we have some bigger fish to fry, but I am super excited to say that I did start a PhD at the University of Melbourne, moved quite literally across the world in order to do that. And in my daily life, I focus primarily on cultural practices. And I use them in order to teach the social science of community. This is really important to me, making sure that we're able to teach community as a social scientist. And in that regard, I want to focus on this specific research question in my research. We're not going to dive into this in the long haul, but the question is, how do we inoculate our online communities from toxicity without isolating them from the dominant context, right? Now, the important thing about this is I am not going to be able to tackle this all in one presentation. So I have an entire YouTube channel that's dedicated to that progress. What I want to focus on here right now is that inoculation part, which is how can you as community moderators even have any sense of control over your online community's reveal for toxicity. So the purpose of this chat, the purpose of this talk, again, I'm going to be tackling the ever so amorphous, how do we pick metrics question? And I'm going to do it very simply because I have a few slides that if you've had some experience with my presentations before, I tend to gloss over these slides, right? Like I tend to just move on. They're too complicated. Well, now we're going to dwell in that space. And I'm going to make it a lot easier for you to understand. And we're going to reverse engineer some expert level metric dashboards so that you can better understand it. And although we're applying it to user moderation, because that's kind of where my brain space is right now, I want you to know that this really just explains how math works. This is going to make statistics super simple and super easy. But as with all of my presentations, I have 3 promises that I want from all of you. So toss a hand up, raise a hand, use that wave emoji in the chat if you agree and promise that you are going to plan big with your metrics dashboard, but progress small. Only worry about one thing that your community team is worried about so that we can get good and then get better. Learn one thing, and then this and all of those resources in my YouTube channel will be around for you to come back later. So that's the promise. Please toss it in the chat for me if you are willing to promise that you will do exactly this. Let's take a look. Let's see. Oh yeah, I vow to do so. Wonderful. So let's get started, right? We have a lot of ground to cover, so I've simplified this. The entire reality of metrics and organization in a mere 6 slides, albeit complex slides. Now, all of math, all of statistics, all of the measurement, every single expert in our industry, every expert in marketing is just simply performing this one task, right? Like no one is really a numbers person entirely, honestly. All they are doing is doing this. What is called abstraction is the art of simplifying data systematically in order to summarize it so that people understand its meaning only so far as they actually care, right? Like the whole point of math is to tell an increasingly simplistic story. So here's the academics of it. You don't need to worry about what is on the right. This is one of those slides that I often gloss past, right? But it's really important for you to kind of screenshot this, look at it over time. But what we really care about, all we care about, is this little section here on the left. You'll see that high levels of abstraction, once you've done the job as a mathematician, you have a broader scope of reality, but it includes less detail purposefully. And when you start diving into that data, you start massaging it a little bit. You're using more detail in what actually happened to complicate the story. The way that this works, this is a very basic, super 101 chart that you would find in a statistics class. And it might look scary, right? Like the word nominal in and of itself, like what does that mean? But as we look at this, these are literally all of the data types that you're likely going to run into. And you'll see it falls along the continuum. So the first one, nominal data, is simply defined as categories. It's just tag the data based upon things that happened. Did they happen to be engaging with your site on Firefox or Chrome? You can't really combine that in any way, shape, or form necessarily, can you? So that's nominal data. It doesn't really have a gauge. Then the next step up is going to be ordinal data. Now, this is order that is given, but it's not necessarily 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not continuous, but it is something that you can start categorizing. You can say, how likely are you to strongly disagree, to strongly agree? We're very familiar with that, with using Firefox or Chrome. And now we put numbers to that content that we kind of get, we kind of understand it, right? Now, the next step is for us to say, oh, okay, so 2 users said that they strongly agree with using Firefox and ranked Firefox above Chrome. However, 4 users did not, right? So we now have a count. And this word count is going to be the most important thing because that's what allows us to do math. Then you'll see that detailed conversation, those records and what comes out of your data sets is called continuous data. And this is literally just an unbroken line of data. 1 sale, 2 sales, 3 sales, 4 sales. Next day, 1 sale, 2 sales, 3 sales. This specific continuum is simply dividing the types of data. And what's important is we live in the community space on the left-hand side of this, right? And we find it relatively simple for us to go, oh, community members are prioritizing this tool over this tool. And oftentimes we use ordinal data, specifically in our surveys, Likert scales and matrix scales, like complicated words for really what is very, very simple, asking people's opinion. And once we get past that dotted line, right? That dotted line is when you start hiring experts. That dotted line is when I start getting a paycheck. But the purpose of this talk is to help you cross that dotted line, make it super simple. And the way that this works, right? This is exactly what us experts have been doing ad nauseum. I'm about to give away the secret, right? We are using what I am terming and making highly simplistic the atomic metrics system. And all it is 4 layers that describe the entirety of math and statistics. And you can use 1 or 2 or 3 of these layers over and over again in order to build yourself immensely complicated systems that report on the story. And what I want you to do is you'll notice that scale on the left, remember general scope at the top, details on the bottom. It's very easy for you to get overwhelmed going top down. So what I want you to do is go bottom up, right? An atomic metric, the very atoms of your dashboards are simply counts. Describe what happened, count the thing, right? And then ask why you're counting it. Why do you care about new users specifically? What value does that have? And that's something that you come up with. That's why you're picking that specific number out of a data set. Then, once you have those counts, you can start connecting them, start relating them to one another. This is velocity is simply speed over time, right? Momentum. These are simply formulas that ask how each count relates to one another. And over time, as you do this over and over and over again, you start to build a better story out of a collection of these metrics. Genuinely, these are the only 4 layers that you're going to need. You might have 2 value layers, but you're only going to need these 4. So let's take an example. Simple example, one of the most common metrics for marketing and for community specifically, which is your retention, which is daily active users over monthly active users. Based upon a cohort, what new users have stuck around, what are they doing and why, right? So we're going to start again at the bottom, working ourselves up. An atomic metric simply means we got 1 new post this week. And we got 2 comments this week from the same user. That's what they did, right? So we record that action and then we ask, why is that relevant to us? Well, posts in and of themselves might be more worthwhile than the comments are. You could also reverse that, right? But what you're doing is you're saying, here's why it matters. Here's the value of that count. Then you relate to it. First off, did they perform an action today? Awesome. Then they are considered active over a certain period. And how many points have they accrued across all of their activity? Ooh, that user might be an important person to highlight. Awesome. Then you've developed a metric system, which is literally telling you what actions to take. Highlight this user because they seem to be posting a lot, and give a kudos to this user because they've commented in the new user section constantly. And when you start adding time to this, at 1 month, that user has gained a tremendous amount of confidence and you manage to retain them. Who else of their cohort has dropped off the map and why? This is super simple once you break it down, but it's pretty complex for you to actually build it, right? Just break it down into layers of abstraction. It's exactly what we experts do. Now, let's ask then how you actually go about doing this. Experts, you'll see Chris Mercer. I love him at measurementmarketing.io. I'm very happy to consider him a mentor. He simply asks 3 questions, right? And remember, this is an expert in the upper echelons of measurement, right? And he's doing the exact same thing. He just asks, what do we need to know? What are our goals? What are our objectives? And he knows that no matter what occurs, he's just going to ask the results, the count, and how it happened. And that begins to tell the story. If you start looking at data without doing that, you're going to get lost because that data just won't make sense to you. You're not approaching it with a question. Once you've developed that, that's when you can start pulling out your atomic metrics, right? What are those counts? Then you'll ascribe a value to it, and then you'll ask how they relate. By doing this and by planning to do it before you ever even touch the data, you have now created a system that says exactly what you need to pull. But none of that matters. None of it matters unless there's an action that you would take. So ask yourself, if the data comes out as I expect, if the question is a yes, a resounding yes, what's that going to look like? And what does it mean for our brand, our community, our business, our Reddit page? Doesn't matter. So that's where the KPIs come in. And that's where visualizing this data comes in. And especially where moderation is concerned, that's where understanding the actions your team takes and why translates into the momentum that builds culture. So that's big, right? Like we just went over 6 slides. First, we asked, what exactly is abstraction? Then we asked, okay, what are these abstraction layers? How do they actually work? What kinds of data are we actually looking at? And then we said, just use the system in order to map out and construct even the most complex metrics. So we're going to really quickly run through a few examples, and I'm going to make something really complicated make complete and total sense. This is a basic Google Analytics 4 report. I actually just popped into Google Analytics 4's basic dashboard, snapped a picture of it, and all we want to ask, question, how many active users do I have compared to last week? Remember that cohort. So we're going to look at a metric. This is literally all a metric is. You are counting active users. You have decided that's important, and the data returns a result. And then you say, awesome. Now, how has that changed over the previous period? Single metric. That's all you need on your dashboard. Let's make it slightly more complex. In order for you to answer this question, you require 2 count metrics, 2 atomic metrics. You also need to know who your new users are and whether there's been a drop-off. Now, fun fact, all graphs, period. It doesn't matter what they are, pie charts, histograms, line charts, data charts, doesn't matter how complex it gets. All they are is simply a formula layer. They're simply a metric formula. And you can see here that we are asking active users over time. First thing that you need to know, it goes on the graph, and merely looking at this graph to decide it has now attributed the value of that metric. You have now said it's useful. So let's look at the entire dashboard, right? At first, this seems really overwhelming. And this is a relatively simple one, right? We've seen more complex dashboards. But just by breaking it down into the layers of abstraction, you now have the ability to better read the system. Super simple, super easy, right? All you need to go do is go through it. Now, Jay, at All Things in Moderation, he had a specific statement where the regulatory landscape for moderation on our online communities has become dizzyingly complex, right? And it's changed so dramatically in our industry. And he points out that these are the major things that we need to worry about. And one would presume these are the things that we need to measure. So how do you go about measuring proactive content moderation? Well, it's just an atomic metric that asks, did your moderators get to it before your users did? Did your users see it before you managed to take it down? And you can do this atomic metric system with every single one of these, right? We're not going to take time to go through that, but if you would do me a favor and pop that link right there, the dashboard database and the dashboard studio slide, I've given you an example, right? An entire workable, please take this, use it for free, take care of your moderation team's struggles, go do it, right? I have a 5-page system, and you can actually see that I have built all of this to be interactive over time. So you just need to connect your data and it just works through. In order for you to do that, of course. Like, you're going to run into hangups. You're going to have problems, right? You're going to run into specific issues about how you're going to develop this information. You're going to get stuck. But I want you to think about what layers you have, what questions you're trying to answer, and what actions you are going to take afterward. If there's no action, then it might be pointless to measure it. You're asking the wrong question. If the information is too hard to collect, no worries. Ask yourself, how do I collect just this singular count atomic metric? And of course, I am also readily available. I am really happy to do all of this work with you and alongside you, because I truly believe in the power of co-iterative learning, especially in community. So let's take some time. Let's practice. Let's ask some good questions, which we can absolutely do in networking here after we get a little bit of time to do that. I'll be there. And I also have the ability, at least right now, to take questions for the most part. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope that I've at least succeeded in hypersimplifying this concept as much as possible to make metrics more accessible.
Hi, Venia.
Hello.
What an amazing presentation. I loved it. I love the topic that you're working on. It is so amazing and so much needed. One of the things that I want to ask from a community perspective, because we are, and this, by the way, your presentation, I just want to say this right in the beginning that it was really amazing and helpful from like engage, like how do we track like non-tangible engagement, because I'm an engineer, and when I started communities like 5 years back or 6 years back actually now, what happened was, for an engineer it's very difficult to kind of even accept that non-tangible data exist. Like, there are things that we cannot represent in numbers. And
Right.
it was so amazing to see that qualitative slide. I wish I saw that like 6 years back. It would make my life so much easier. So one of the things that I'm trying to kind of understand is that, for example, WhatsApp is like a really famous here, and then really being used as one of the tools for community. And one of the risks, and I've never used it for community building a community or adding all people in a WhatsApp group, because there's almost no way for me to kind of control what one member would like talk to another, because they can also reach out to each other, and there's probably something on the tool level. But then it's very behavioral, and for me it was very risky to create a group, because I have no control over what one member would say to another in a private chat, that I have no control over, and I don't even oversee, and it can be something very offensive, or even uncomfortable, like anywhere on the spectrum of like uninvited conversation or whatever that is like uncomfortable. And those are the things which are very behavioral, and it's very difficult to kind of even put that problem together in a very tangible way. So what are the are there ways, what are the ways do you think? And I think from yours, because you're also working on toxic, how to kind of work around it, what are the ways in which you think we can look at it, both from an analytical point of view and from like a solution point of view on what could be the solution?
Yeah, and this is an incredibly pertinent question, because we're starting to run into massive problems of how do we build the internet to be safe with us not collecting that data, because there is data that we can't collect. Dark data exists, and it is just becoming a bigger and bigger part of our job over time. So at some point in time, we have to stop being metrics obsessed. Jono has been saying this for years. It's almost prophetic at this point. So the question that you really have is, how do you measure the potential harm that comes from individuals who abuse small social group and individual contributions? Like, how do you manage private messages that are just unhealthy? And let's be frank, especially on social media platforms, you are just inundated with that, right? Like there's no stopping it. Even Facebook can't do it with their gigantic AI, right? So the easiest way to consider this, again, atomic metric system, ask yourself first, what type of data is it? You want to collect user flag data. If something is uncomfortable, you want to ask why they wouldn't report it, right? What is being reported? What are you missing in those numbers? So the story you want to tell the system is, I need to know why people aren't using my flag system in PMs. Then your second question is, okay, what do I need to know in order to answer that? What is the count metric that I'm going to have? On WhatsApp, you need to actually pull your flag data and ask, are your categories, remember that categorical data, are those categories appropriate? Do they match? Maybe it doesn't cover it entirely. Then you need to count the amount of times flags were used based upon the amount of times they were abandoned. Like you click the flag, you're asked to categorize it, and then you don't categorize it, so you leave. That seems important. What is the conversion rate of your flag, right? That's a formula. And you basically just go through this atomic system and you ask what behaviors and what sentiments on that simple flag button do I need to know? Just collect that, tell the story, and then ask yourself, is this implementation, is this architecture actually working to ensure safety?
So thank you so much. I think it was a very, I would say, extensive answer, which kind of includes a lot of factors. I'm definitely going to go back to the recording and see how I can probably make notes around it and then use it as a process. You are really a scientist already. So there's one question that we have in the Q&A, Venia, which is about what AI tools do you suggest for analyzing my data? And the nature of data is kind of not defined here. So Denise, if you can kind of comment on that, it will be great because I'll communicate that. But then we saw your tool, Venia, but then are there any AI tools with so many like AI tools coming up with a lot of them being free and amazing? Are you working on any of them as of now, or are there some of those tools that you're looking forward to work with, which can be helpful in this space?
Yeah, honestly, I'm going to tell you it's in a bad state. To be frank, AI usage for community moderation is in a bad state because these systems are not being built to be contextual. They're being built to manage policy, to reinforce and restrict active moderation. So I do recommend on one side, get an intelligence platform, get a community intelligence platform, because this is their primary problem. And over time, they're just going to get better at doing it. Common Room is a really, really great option. I absolutely adore the platform. And on the other end, moderation needs to not be about simply taking action. You need to measure beyond the support request, right? And the easiest way for you to do that, I highly recommend looking into like my cultural counterpart. It's kind of become Ruth Diaz has some amazing statements about counseling and training your moderators in order to go beyond those support requests. Highly recommend looking into that. Thank you.
And yeah, I think in my opinion, because I've been researching on the topic as well, and my opinion, I think the AI tools catalog that we have, it's a little nascent, and it's still working. Technically it's working on. Great. Yeah, technically it's working on a lot of data, which is kind of with like any AI model works on data that is available to it to take decisions. And I think a lot of times it kind of like a lot of times when I use AI tools, the output I get is it's like too generic to be meaningful in the context where I'm asking the question. No. Agreed. So yeah. It's so like it makes sense, but not at all in my context because it's a very generic answer. Like it's like me asking, what does your company do, and you telling me, oh, we create value. Okay, but that's grammatically that's a great answer. Yeah. but that also tells me nothing about the company
Right.
with that.
I want to take that a step further, right? First off, that is a challenge that pretty much everyone is facing. When you consider the biggest industry AI right now, which is Perspective API and the Facebook Hasher Matcher Actioner tool. First off, smaller brand communities don't really get access to that. They're working on it. You do have abilities to do that using open source software. You can access those larger databases. But I have made a practice of running communities on an audit through these systems. And there's also a huge wealth of academic research that I have read over the course of the past 6 months I've been in Melbourne that agree with me that the vast majority of false reports in this data are actually punishing a punitive response from the auto mod for actually really good content that actually protects your community from toxicity. And these big systems, they don't understand that because they are trying to aggregate data. I didn't talk about this in the talk, but there is a very clear difference between qualitative data. Remember that dotted line, which is when you hire an expert. The categorical data that you receive in your community cannot be numeral, right? Like you can't really make aggregate assumptions out of that data. You can't just put all of it into a single metric and then say that works. That's what these AIs are doing. And the reason for that is because unless you have 60% of a qualitative data set in agreement, it won't aggregate toward a result. It aggregates away from one. Imagine asking everyone on the planet a singular opinion about one question. You will get an infinite amount of perspectives and therefore infinite answers. That's not one thing. You can't aggregate that data. That's why these systems give you something too general, and that's why they break.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And one of the things that I am kind of trying to kind of expecting from this AI tool world is like having like having like a platform which is the API, the logics is very well trained on all the data that's available. But then I have the ability to disconnect all the generic data with having the intelligence of the application with an AI layer on top, and then disconnect it from that data and then connect my data so that I can ask the question and then it gives me exact answers based on the data set that I am providing to make it contextual. I think if that happens, I think we have some time where we reach that point, but if that happens, it would be really amazing.
Sounds good. We'll work that out in the networking session a little bit later on when we do practice, but I think we are moving to the next speaker, right?
We are. I feel like this is such an important conversation though for tool builders. Like if you want some feedback, come listen to us talk about it. Because like this is money.